So tonight we have a very special guest, Leslie Kean, and she wrote the book Surviving Death. She has documented cases far and wide of people's experience after they leave the body. I can't call them near-death experiences because my perception of it is it's after-death experiences. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience just so that we can come here to learn whatever is needed to learn to take it on to the next life. I'd like to say hello to Leslie Kean. How are you this evening, Leslie?
Hi, Bill. I'm really well, and I'm so happy to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I brought Star into the studio with me. How are you this evening, Star?
Good evening, Bill. Hello, Leslie. Nice to meet you. Glad you're here, and I'm doing well, and I'm ready to hear this. This is interesting. A few little stories myself, maybe. So let's get into it.
And one other co-host with me, or one other crew, is Mr. William White Crow, and he is my shaman, and he is very spiritual, and we've discussed life after death many times. How are you this evening, William?
I'm doing fine. Looking forward to the show. I've done some reading on Leslie's material and her research, and it's going to be a good show all the way around. And as you said, Bill, you know, I've had my own near-death experiences right in front of my family, and once in Vietnam. So I'm looking forward to the show. I'm glad she's here.
Okay, Leslie, could you please start by telling us where we can find your book and get right into it?
Sure, and I'm just so happy to have your other two people on tonight because I'm always interested in hearing about people's experiences. My book is called Surviving Death, and the subtitle is A Journalist Investigates Evidence for an Afterlife. And I'm basically, I understand that all of you, probably most of your listeners, accept the reality of survival past physical death. And my book was really geared towards people who have not thought that much about it, or maybe are skeptical about it and haven't read a lot about it, haven't had experiences themselves. I mean, a lot of the readers have, but I'm also trying to reach an audience of people that are not necessarily open to this. And I'm hoping this book will open people's eyes and open doors for them. So I'm really providing a lot of very basic evidence that comes from a lot of different sources, pulling it all together into one book, trying to make it as evidential and as, sort of scientific and journalistically sound as possible to reach people really through the intellect, through their minds, as opposed to through direct experiences. And those who have had experiences, of course, I think will find the book very supportive of their experiences, and it gives them a context in which they can put those experiences, and they can also come to understand that there's been research done on these kinds of things, and that many other people have had the same experiences that they've had. And I also include my own experiences in the book, as well as my research. So that sort of gives you an overview of what my purpose was in writing it.
And where can we find your book?
Well, I have a website. The URL for the website is Surviving Death Kean. That's my last name, which is spelled Kean, Kean. And if you go to that website, there are links. You can buy the book just about anywhere. You can buy it on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles or all the different websites that sell books. Or if you just put the title in Google or put my name in Google, you will definitely find it. But I think most people like to go to Amazon, and it's actually at a very low price on Amazon. So it's a good place to get it.
Let me ask you, have you run into people that say that, well, when I die, there's nothing there? When I die, it's over. Have you been able to explain to people that's just not the way it is?
Yeah, I mean, there are people who have told me actually that they thought like that before they read my book. And now the book has completely turned their worldview upside down and made them really have to think and really have to question, the presumption that death is the end. I mean, I'm not actually saying in the book that I have proof for survival past death, but I'm giving very strong evidence and letting people make up their own minds. And I think by the end of the book, as I said, those that don't believe in it it's pretty hard for them to maintain that position. Let's put it that way, after reading the evidence that's presented in the book.
And speaking of evidence, I don't know, it was about 15, 20 years ago on a Discovery Channel. there were so many cases of people leaving their bodies and saying what went on in that room. Well, there was one experiment set up that a word in LED lights was on top of a locker that you would have to be well above to see it. About 15, 20 years ago, they said to date, no one has come back and told them what the words were. Do you have any documentation of that? Have you heard of this experiment, or has there been proof since it came up about 15, 20 years ago? And at that time, they said they've never had anyone tell them what the words on that sign were.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really great question, and I know that I've talked to some medical doctors who have set studies up like that, where they've like put something in a hidden location or put something up on the ceiling of the room. And the reason that they say it doesn't seem to work is, number one, they don't know in a hospital which room the person's even going to end up in. Number two, if they do go out of their bodies, and they tend to be up on the ceiling looking down at their own bodies, right? I mean, they tend to be observing what's going on in terms of themselves. And so, they seem to find that, there isn't any reason for them to look up at the ceiling and remember some number up there. It seems like it's not really a feasible experiment or one that can work very well. That was my understanding of it anyway.
Yeah. William, your near-death experience, could you share that for a moment?
Well, I could share part of it, yeah. As I just typed in there to our little chat area, she's on it. Because when it happened to me, I was electrocuted by 24,000 volts, 350 amps, two high-tension power lines that were next to our house. We were putting up an antenna, and the guy that's supposed to be watching the top of the antenna, the power lines obviously wasn't. I got hit full blast, and it literally disintegrated the wrench that was in my hand. We never found it. And I knew I was on my way out when I got electrocuted. It was just, I could see the juice going through me. It blew my knees out, my toes out, my fingers. It just melted them, blew them out. Everything just curled up, atrophy, like just curled up because of the electricity. And I hit the ground, and I was in water, a little bit of standing water. So my wife came out. My son was standing right there, and I always taught him, bless him, if you ever see a fire, head for water. Well, I was on fire, and he headed straight into the front yard, and he had a little 5-gallon bucket, and he jumped in it. He was just a little tight at that time, And my wife came out, and all the neighbors come out. I took in all of the electricity in the town of Volta, which is just right outside Los Banos, California, as a matter of fact. When I left, you don't know you're leaving, I was above the power lines looking down. That's the first recollection I had. And I was looking at my body, just like she said. And it was like, okay. And then I immediately thought of my family. Oh, my God. But that went away. I mean, just instantaneously. And next thing I know, I'm in a different world, a different, shall we say, dimension or whatever you want to call it, It was far beyond anything one would ever think of heaven, far beyond. It was realer than real. And I was standing on a beach. This is the interest. Maybe it's because of the way I was raised as a shaman, a medicine person and everything, and the native beliefs and everything. But I was standing on a beach, and one side was that red clay, that adobe red clay, that beautiful color, but it was all sand, crystalline. And then on the other, about 15, 20 feet from the beach was that white, pure crystalline sand, and there was just a perfect divide between these. And I looked to my left, and I seen some trees and 3 sets of hills. A tree on each hill in a different position, like they were raggedy and windblown, and no leaves, no nothing. And then I looked over to the right, and it was just beautiful water, just lapping waves. And you see the water diamonds, like there's diamonds in the water when it's just hitting the shore in some movies. That's what it looked like. Mm-hmm. And everything was just perfect on that side. So it was like almost like I had a choice. But what really stuck me, that's why I typed it in. I looked at myself first, my body, and then I seen my family and the neighbors and everybody standing around me. And my wife grabbed me and pulled me. I was gone for about 10 minutes. And my wife pulled me and straightened me out, and everything, got me out from where, we were working and everything and out of the water. She kept saying, it's not your time, come back. And I had moved from where I was down to the beach, and I looked and I seen footprints, but yet I know I had no body. That was unbelievable feeling. And I was in peace. I'm going to be honest with you. I was in total peace here. I was really not thinking of anything. It was like I knew what was happening for some reason. And I kind of levitated out over the water, and when I was out, heading out a little bit ways, just kind of, I guess you could say looking around, but I was being pulled a direction, really, in a sense. I heard, it's not, you have to stop, it's not your time yet. And when I came back, it was like falling. There's a lot more to it, but I'm giving you a short version. And I started falling back. I went straight. I didn't fall, but I went right back across the water, back to the edge of the beach here. Seeing my footprints as I'm moving backwards, right to my same position that I got there in. I watched the footsteps disappear, and then I felt like I was falling off a 50-story building backwards. Whew, that body rush, and then whoo, I woke up real fast. Like my wife said, my body just jumped, like I jumped back in my body, and I had no heartbeat, any of that. I was gone. Right. And when I woke up, it was like, let me stand up. I have to stand up. It's just a survival mode that I go into. I got to stand up and survey in myself and everything. And that's pretty much the short version of my experience. But that falling, I tell you what, coming back in, it's like traveling 1,000 miles an hour backwards, and then you hit. And you come back in your body. It was just amazing.
It reminds me of the Pam Reynolds case. I don't know if you remember in the book, but she described when she was out of her body, she didn't want to go back, which is so common. As you say, you're at peace in this beautiful environment. And she talks about a family member who actually forced her to go back. And she described a similar thing, that she was like falling, and then she suddenly like landed with this big, kind of thud in her body, and her body they were at that point trying to start her heart again, but she described it as a very unpleasant experience to have to back in.
Definitely.
Very unpleasant.
Definitely it is. It's a rush. That's about the best way you can put it.
And so many people say they don't want to come back.
I didn't. I came back, and I'm glad I did because of my family. I look at it now, but there's still a longing way back in the back there that when death comes, I'm not going to fight it at all. I'm totally not afraid of death, and when it happens, I guess it's a good day to die. Best way to put it. That's
how the Native Americans used to say it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my belief. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really an incredible story. I really appreciate hearing it.
And that's why I asked him.
Thank you for letting me tell it.
Yeah, and that's why I asked him to share it, because I'm sure that you have, similar case histories. Is the most interesting case history you came across the child that claimed he was the pilot that got killed in a war?
I mean, that certainly was one of them. That one and the child Ryan Hammonds, who was an actor in Hollywood, they're both, to me, very compelling cases, largely because the children were so young and because all their memories were verified as accurate. So it's very hard to explain how they could have had those memories that could be proven to be accurate, and memories of the life of someone who had died decades before they were born, and someone to which their families had no connection at all, just a complete, no connection. And yet the child not only remembered specific facts, both these children and other children too, but they also kind of relived a lot of it and had nightmares about their previous death and would play act things from the previous life. And they had a lot of emotion around the whole thing. So it was a lot more than just memories. Really, really impacted their lives dramatically. They often had some kind of a experience that kind of resolved it for them, which is often what happens with these kids, whether it be going back to the previous house they lived in or meeting family members from the previous family or something that kind of, I guess, shows them that they're now ready to move on in the present life. But yeah, I think those cases are really compelling.
So could you go into details about the little boy who was shot down in a previous life? Because I'm sure not everyone knows that story, and that is such an incredible story that I tell people about it.
Sure, and I'll give the short version like we just heard from your other guest. I could talk about it for half an hour, but I'm going to give you a thumbnail sketch of it, all right?
Please do.
Yeah. And people can look up, again, I hope they'll read the book, but anyway, and look it up online or whatever. But his name was James Leininger. He wasn't even 2 years old when he started having these memories. It was literally when he was beginning to talk. And he just started in various situations. The first one was that the very first thing he said was Well, first of all, his dad took him to a museum where there were all these airplanes, and he was completely freaked out by the airplanes and obsessed with them. He didn't want to leave, and his father thought that was very strange. Then his mom was pushing him in a stroller by a little toy store. She picked up a toy airplane, and she handed it to him, and she said, "Look, James, it has a bomb underneath it." And it was this plastic airplane, and he said, "No, Mom, that's not a bomb. That's a drop tank." And she went home and said, "What's a drop tank?" Asked her husband, and he said it was this tank that you put on the bottom of an airplane that stores fuel when you have to drive a long distance. Now, there was no way that their child could have known what a drop tank was. They hadn't been exposed to anything that would have taught him that. And so that was just the beginning. And it went on. He started to develop these horrific nightmares where he would absolutely scream in terror and crawl up in a little ball. His dad said it looked like he was trying to break out of a coffin, which I thought was a really eerie way of describing it. Eventually, he started to talk during the dreams, the nightmares, and he would say, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out." Over and over again, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out." And he was absolutely terrorized, way more than a normal nightmare, as his parents described it, and other family members who witnessed it as well. And over a period of time, he was able to provide a lot of specific information. Among them was that his name in the previous life was James, that he was shot by the Japanese on the front of his airplane when he was fighting in a war. He said he flew a plane called the Corsair. He flew off of a boat called the Natoma. Again, those two terms are specific, some terms that a 2-year-old would not know, a Corsair and a Natoma. And he had a best friend whose name was Jack Larson. And he was shot down near the island of Iwo Jima, which he pointed to in a book when he was looking at a book with his dad. Those were all very specific details. And eventually, his father was able to go to some reunions from veterans who flew off the Natoma Bay. And he was eventually able to find a person who matched the descriptions that James gave him. And he actually met Jack Larson, who James had said was his friend back in that life, who was still living. And the other interesting component of this is that when James was 3, he used to draw. He drew hundreds of drawings of the plane crash, of this plane being shot down, and he always signed them James 3. And his parents would say, "Why are you signing them James 3?" And he said, "Because I'm the third James." And they thought just because he was 3 years old. They didn't understand that. But it turned out that the person that matched his description that he said he was in that past life was named James Houston Jr. And his dad almost, fainted when he heard that, because the junior would mean that little James now was the third James, which is what he had always said. And so it's a long story in terms of how his dad was able to track all this information down and how he was actually able to locate the previous personality, James Houston Jr. And what happened was they found his sister, who was in her 80s at this point, and little James got to meet her. This woman who was in her 80s now, and she was 24 when James Houston had died in the plane crash. And she was absolutely convinced that little James was her brother, because he knew all this stuff about their family life, things about growing up with his sister, and all this stuff that he told her that he couldn't possibly have known. So that was a really interesting component. And eventually he went back to the location of where the crash happened, off the coast of this island near Iwo Jima. And he had this sort of cathartic experience where he said goodbye to James Houston. And that was sort of the turning point for James Leininger, where he kind of moved into his present life. And, and now he's 18 years old and an honor roll student, was a really excellent student and a very accomplished young man. And he's now in the military, having a career in the military. So that's basically the story. There's a lot more details of things he remembered and how the whole thing unfolded that are fascinating. But that gives you the case and sort of an overview of the case.
He has no memory of where he was between dying and coming back.
Well, he did talk about some things that he said happened before he was born, but he didn't really describe the environment. But he did talk about sort of choosing his parents. He said he chose his parents, and he described where they were the night that he was conceived, which they were absolutely stunned because they were in a pink hotel in Hawaii. That evening they had eaten dinner on the beach, and James was able to describe all of that to them, and they had never told him about it. He also talked about meeting some of the servicemen he called it heaven, in heaven, some of the people who had served with him on the Natoma, and he actually had the names. He named his G.I. Joe dolls, various G.I. Joe dolls. This is really interesting. He had 3 G.I. Joe dolls, which were really popular with kids, slept with and absolutely adored. And he gave them 3 different names. They were given to him at different times, and they all had a different hair color. So the brown-haired one he called Billy, the blonde one was named Leon, and the red-haired one was called Walter. And his parents thought that was sort of strange because they didn't, for a kid to have the name Leon and Walter when they were like 2 or 3 years old, they thought it was kind of odd. And they asked him where he got the names. And he said, well, these were the people he met in heaven before he was born again. These were people that were there in heaven. And his dad looked them up and got the list. When he got the list of the servicemen who had been killed, he found out that each of these names matched someone who had died, who had served with James Houston Jr., and who had died before him, and that they met, the actual hair colors corresponded to the names of the people that James had given them. But in terms of, it's really incredible. But he didn't talk a lot about what life, what his experience was of being in heaven. He just described having met these people in heaven and having seen his parents before he was born as well.
Yeah, so incredible. I don't see how, after a story like that, anybody can dispute reincarnation or life after death. So many people fear death, and I think that was inbred in us. It's a glorious thing to know that you are just a spiritual being having a physical experience. Star, what's on your mind?
I'm sitting here thinking of past life experiences that I've had in the whole kid remembering he was a pilot. It brought all that to mind again. So I got a few things I can share if we have time.
Sounds really good. And Leslie, thank you for coming on Voices from Afar, and we'll be back.
Welcome back, everyone, to Voices from Afar. And tonight we have on board with us Bill Demarest and myself, Star the Oracle, and William Whitecrow. And our special guest this evening is Leslie Kean, and she has written a book about life after death.
The title of the book is Surviving Death: Journalist Investigates Evidence for an Afterlife.
Thank you. And we were discussing not only life after death, but we brought up some past life experiences where the little boy is remembering a past life. And it's weird when you remember a past life, and I'm not under hypnosis or anything. So there's always that thing in my brain that's going, is this just a really cool imaginary thing? Is my brain just going, oh, it's a nice little trip, that's cool, but it's a memory. It's a memory because it has emotion to it and feeling to it, and you know what's going to happen, and it's weird. It's not like just watching something, but when you have all of the emotion with it, like the boy did, that lets you know it's something internal.
Right. Very internal. Yeah.
So one of the ones that I had, there's a few. I'm gonna talk about this one. Okay, tell me this. Do people talk about seeing the whole thing as a scene and knowing it was them, and also being in it at the same time?
I think that's an interesting question, because I think more adults, when adults talk about their memories, they often describe it that way more than children. I think the children, they're so young, they have no concept of what life even is, or even death. They don't even know anything. So they're kind of reliving it. And it seems they're really little. There's something unresolved about that life, which is probably why it's having such an effect on them. But when an adult has a memory, I think it's a very different process. And maybe I know some mediums and people who describe it as seeing it like on a screen.
Yes.
Imagery. So I think yes. I think that's
yeah. Because what I see is it's nighttime. It's what I can describe it now is I think it's about the Civil War time. There's a small cabin. The night's clear. There's a bright, almost full moon overhead. There's like a split rail fence around the yard. I'm in the yard and I'm saying goodbye to my husband, I guess, and he's dressed in Civil War garb. And right in the tree line, all the horses, all the men on horses are going past, and he's leaving because they're coming around, and he's joining up with them, and he's going. And I can hear it, I can smell it, I can feel it, everything. You know, the night air, you know, hearing the horses, just, they're not going fast, they're just slowly going through the woodline. They're not in big hurries. You know, it's the details, the dress, the cabin, the fence, the yard, you know, everything. It's interesting.
It's probably clearer and more vivid than a normal memory, right? It feels more vivid than just a memory that you might have of something that happened, you know, a few years ago or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, I do have a few. There's another one, take me another few minutes to go through, but it's with a Native American tribe out in the Lakotas. So chime in with something, then I'll get back to that if we need to.
Leslie, during the break, I asked you, have you run into anybody that claims they saw the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I mean, I have talked to people who have had what they call near-death experiences, and they might not always involve seeing a light, but sometimes they do. I've talked to some people, but I've also read a lot about different cases and different accounts of people describing what happened to them. I've probably read a lot more about it than I've actually talked to people, because I'm really interested in, as a journalist, in sort of knowing what the researchers have come up with, what the most evidential cases are, the ones that, you know, are really hard to refute. An example being, if somebody has a near-death experience in which they meet somebody, say, who they don't even know, like, and then they find out later something about the person's. For instance, there was one case where a little girl had a near-death experience, and she came back and told her dad, I met this boy there who said he was my brother, but she didn't have a brother. And then her dad told her, well, actually, she did have a brother who died before she was born, and they had never told her about it. So things like that, you know, those are sort of research cases in which there's something there that's very evidential that suggests she wasn't just making something up in her brain. She actually had some kind of experience in which something happened that she couldn't have known about. You know, where you meet someone that you didn't even know had died, or you didn't even know existed. And that's also what happened to Eben Alexander in his famous book, Proof of Heaven, which maybe some of you have read or your listeners have read, in which he met this girl when he was in this other realm, who turned out to have been, I think, his biological sister who he never met, or an adopted sister, or somebody from his family that he didn't even know or didn't know existed, and he only found out afterwards. So those kinds of cases really intrigue me particularly.
So what is your journalism background, do?
I'm an investigative reporter, and in the 90s I did a lot of freelance writing, and then I was also working for a public radio station in California, hosting a daily investigative news show and covering a lot of different kinds of political stories and human rights issues, and a lot of different just stories that you might hear. And it was a very progressive radio station. And then what happened was I got very interested in the UFO subject based on a report that I was given in about 1999, I guess was when I wrote and I started reporting on the UFO topic, but from a very serious journalistic perspective, you know. And then in 20, that all culminated. I spent about 10 years investigating that topic, and in 2010 I published my book about UFOs, called UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. And that sort of was the culmination of a lot of research I had done, which involved speaking with very high-level government officials and, you know, government people around the world who had investigated the phenomenon, and using official documentation and radar data and stuff like that to really show that there is something real there, and to explore why it is that the U.S. government seems to not want to acknowledge it. And so that was a real focus of mine. But I maintained my journalistic perspective, but I was really focused primarily on that issue for many years. And then after that, I had also been interested in these kinds of cases as well, involving the question of survival past death. And after my UFO book came out, I had more time to focus on this topic. And so that's what led to the new book that just came out.
My dear, where are you going when you leave? Leslie?
You're talking to me. Where am I going? Tell me what you mean by that question.
When you leave this body, where are you headed?
I wish I knew, Bill. Maybe you can tell me. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
it's an individual journey. Everybody is going to, their journey is going to be what it is. None of us can really predict what that's going to be. We may have a feeling, because of the indications and science has proven, like you're talking about, Leslie, the existence of life after death. It's just a transition anyway, but each person's journey is an individual journey. They'll all be different.
I've had this happen twice, Leslie, so maybe this will help answer that question. Maybe it won't at all. This was an experience I had in my own backyard. I had visitors come to the house. I decided not to smoke my cigarette in the house. My mother-in-law at the time didn't like it. I said, fine, I'll go out in the backyard. I went out in the backyard. I am 10 feet from my back door, looking up at the stars. It's a nice evening, and I start bawling. My heart is wrenching. I am homesick. I am literally beside myself. I am just so overwhelmed with this homesick feeling, and there's part of me that's doing this, having all this, and there's the other side of me that's going, what's going on? I want to go home. You're in your own backyard, sweetie. This is a home. Where's home? Home's up there. I'm having this whole conversation with myself in my backyard. So yeah, I've told William about this before, but yeah. So where is home? And it's up there. So am I from another planet and I get to go back home after this? I don't know. But I do know that there was another time that somebody had asked me how old I was, and without thought, it was just instinct, came straight out of my mouth. And Earth years, where does that come from? Where does that come from? I asked myself immediately, where does that come from? So, we are not limited to our physical bodies. We are temporarily here using our physical bodies. Yes, William.
Yeah, we're not attached to any one thing. This is where we need to be at this time. My perspective and your perspective is really close there. Because I've done the same thing. I've walked right outside on my porch, and I've looked up in the sky and it's fed up with the world and everything, and even though I'm helping a lot of people, at the same time, and I go, you can come and get me anytime.
I say that about every day. I say that.
Oh yeah, but it's a feeling of that connection with something that isn't from here. Yes. That's the interesting thing. Not this dimension, this time, space. It's a good memory. It's a good feeling. So it must be very good to have that pull on us, I would imagine.
Leslie, the reason I ask that is there's no doubt in my mind that after this life, I have a starship, and it's Starship Starvexer, and it's a comedy club. And all I wanted to do was, when you get, life is eternal, sometime in the eternal, I would like you to stop by Starvexer's Comedy Club, where you have the opportunity to laugh at yourself in this life, and you become a star.
All right, I'll try and remember that.
Yeah, so we got to start the after bucket list. So after this life, we have a bucket list of the things we need to do. One of them is stop by Starvexer, the comedy club. That's
when the adventure begins. I have a question for you, Leslie. It happened to me. We had lost a child and everything, my wife and I, at about 19 months old in an accident. I went out in the woods, and of course, me being my belief of spirit and everything, I had an argument, with the Great Spirit, shall we say.
Right.
Just give us one more chance. Give us one more chance. A year later, our daughter, Crystal, was born. When she was growing up, and she started drawing pictures, which she started quite early. She would draw the sun and the stick figures playing in yard, and then she would color the whole picture a light blue over the blue. After, 10, 15 pictures like this, she started wondering, what is this, So we asked her, and she goes, it's water. Well, our son Zachariah died in a drowning accident.
Oh.
And it was just like a solid brick hitting you in the head. She's drawing a picture of the sun, and all the pictures and everything are there, and her little brother standing there. from underwater.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Oh, wow.
Did she say anything more about that made you think there was a connection there?
Oh, she said, she indicated that was her. That's what she's seen, and that's what happened to her. We never told her until she was like, 5 or 6 about her little brother,
Right.
passing away that way. So she was drawing these pictures all up to this time. So it's just amazing.
That is really wonderful. It shows her that she's obviously very connected to him. If she was not, maybe she was his reincarnation. Who knows? But if not,
exactly. I think that's what I think. The reincarnation, drawing the pictures, the knowing, and swims like a fish now. Loves the water.
So she's doesn't have any phobias. No phobias, because lots of times these children that drown, when they're reborn, they have phobias about water. But it could work the opposite.
She did in the beginning, just a little bit, and then I told I go by the spirit, how it kind of pushes me, and feeling my wife too. We're both very similar in that. And I said, put her in the water, start teaching her to swim. And before you knew it, it wasn't a fear anymore. It was, let's go swimming. And if there was anything with water in it, she would jump in it and want to go swimming.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that was some comfort
for
your wife. I don't know.
Well, I think she had other things to do here, experiences, and accidents do happen. There are some things that I think are fateful and some that aren't. It's the flux of time, space, I guess you could say. Whatever it is, it sure put us on a different track, too. The death of a child, and then what seemed to be that spirit coming back into this existence in the same family. It's very interesting.
Very interesting, yeah. And it must have been made the death a little bit easier. I don't know if that's appropriate to say or not, but
nothing makes a death easier. What it does is turn around and gives you hope for the next. Is this the one? If you have another one, right. In many cases.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's another, I guess here's another evidence for life after death. And I'm going to give the short version. I'm not going to go through the story again. So just, Leslie, for you, you're getting the abbreviated version. Okay. When my daughter just turned 27, she put a 41 round in 48, or a 458 Nelvik gun, put it to her chin, pulled the trigger. So when all this was going on, like the next night, I was in bed. I had not gone to sleep. All the lights were off, and I'm asking God, okay, where's the bullet? Because the bullet was not in her. It was not in the room. It was not in the gun. It was not anywhere. And Papa Hutchcraft, who was a previous owner of that elephant gun that got handed down to my ex-husband, my daughter's dad, Papa Hutchcraft was standing at the foot of my bed, grinning from ear to ear. He opened his hand. He opened up his hand, and in that hand was the bullet, the round. And he winked, and he vanished. So that answered my question, because I was asking God, where's the bullet? Because obviously if she put the bullet in the gun and it's not in her head, and her head's not on my attic ceiling or anywhere else around the house, because she survived. Miraculously, she survived. She got whiplash, and she still has a little bit of gunpowder in her chin. That's it.
Oh, wow. That's
it. So Papa Hutchcraft came back. Appeared. So he's somewhere, or else, if that was a demon that appeared, then he was very nice and kind. If that was an angel that appeared, then that was really cool of him. If that was Papa that appeared, then high five, dude, thank you, and, whatever. So.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, whoever it was, you got the answer you wanted.
Exactly. It just happened to look like the guy that had the gun, in the lifetime. So.
Yeah.
Have you had any near-death experience, Leslie?
No, I haven't. I've had some experiences that I write about in the book involving some great mediumship readings with a mental medium, and then I had some after-death communications from my brother who died in 2013 during the time I was writing the book, actually, researching it. And then I had some experience sitting with a physical medium in England, which was really amazing. So, but I've never had a near-death experience, no.
Thing to research. I think it's people need to really look a little further than where we're at today. I think it would make life a lot easier for people. I think.
Yeah, I think it does. If you feel that there's going to be something after you die, I think it really changes your life, your perception of life here on Earth when you have that awareness.
it makes it easier to live without fear. We have the alphabet agencies, and I am a domestic terrorist, and I've told them, you can off me anytime you want, because I'm going to be coming back at you from the other side. And from what I've talked to other people about, the problem with these agencies is they cannot conceive how a person doesn't fear death and goes on to a spiritual higher existence, because they're so wrapped up in this 3D existence, correct?
Yeah, I think that's probably true, yeah.
So you are a fearless lady?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, as far as I'm aware, but if I was confronted with my own death, I don't know how I would react. But as far as I can, consciously say in the moment when everything's fine and I'm not being threatened by anything, all these things have really affected me in a very positive way, but I can't. You never know how you're going to react when that moment comes. At least I feel that way, if I'm honest with myself.
You should start relaxing and look forward to it after all the research you've done.
I know. Yeah. Well,
I'm
not ready for that to happen yet.
The unknown is the only fear when it comes to the death. When you haven't experienced it, how am I going to react? Because that's a transition you just don't want to go through, in many ways. So, yeah, I can understand that. She's 100% right. If you haven't experienced it, you don't know how you're going to deal with it when it happens.
And you've had the experience of dying and coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in a very different situation.
Yeah, and I kind of appreciate that. I've experienced, of course, other people dying in combat, and my son and other family members and friends. Having that aspect of experiencing it myself, it's almost like you smile and you say, journey on, my friend. Now the journey begins. It's you're not worried for them anymore. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Right. It's good fortune in a way, even though your accident was horrible. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Yeah. But for somebody to have that experience and then be able to come back certainly is a wonderful thing and will improve their lives, I'm sure. Once they recover.
I've cussed at myself a few times, but then because you're still connected with the other side, actually, so you feel things and know things ahead of time in a lot of ways. So, but I learned, you live with it and you help other people with it, and say, listen, I know something that can help you, because you can start feeling other people's energies and how to work with them. Really, that's a big plus.
Right. Well, that's a wonderful thing, a wonderful gift you can give to people.
And Leslie, any of the cases you've studied, these people come back with what you might call any superpowers or divination or anything of that intensity?
I think sometimes when you have, what I've read is that sometimes the people that have near-death experiences, it does open up sort of psychic abilities in them that they didn't have before. So they become more sensitive on that level. I don't think it always happens, but sometimes it happens. And with these children, I know with the other little boy I write about, Ryan Hammonds, was very, he was quite psychic as a child. He was able to foresee the future and could figure out, when someone in his family was sick, he knew what was wrong with them, those kinds of things. I think but James Leininger didn't have any of those capabilities. So I guess it's different in every case. But I have read that sometimes that door is opened up in people when they come back, and they'll start to have more of those kinds of experiences after a near-death experience.
I agree.
Yeah.
I have a question, if we have time. Leslie, I want to know, because it's my own curiosity here, maybe you can research it, but those that come back, are they, when they are like born under an Aries and they die and they come back, a few minutes later, whenever that time is, and say it's, another sign like Capricorn or Libra. I'm curious to know if that affects them at all.
Wow, that's such an interesting question, Star. I've never had that question before, and I'm not an astrologer, so that would be a great question to ask an astrologer. But I'm assuming that their birth sign is really the one that holds, because they haven't died completely, or they wouldn't be coming back.
Right, but I gotta wonder if there's some sort of an operational reset.
That's such an interesting question. Absolutely, I have no idea. I'm in no way qualified to answer that question.
Okay, we're going to be back in about 3 minutes, and I brought Jonathan in with us because I kind of left him out. I left the wingman out in the wings. And Leslie, we were discussing mediumship and talking to those on the other side. That piqued your interest, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been curious about it, but skeptical, and so I had the opportunity while I was researching my book to do readings with two really, really accomplished mediums who didn't know anything about me or who I was. And one of them was on the phone and one of them was on Skype. And I write about in the book just the incredibly specific details that seemed to be coming through to people I was close to who had died within recent years. And it was just so striking to me how specific the information was. It's one thing if they bring through very general information that can apply to a lot of people, but when they bring through very, very specific information that's personal that nobody else would know about, or maybe just a couple of people would know about, it's very compelling. And I did have the good fortune of having two readings like that with mental mediums, which I do write about in the book, and very, very compelling. They're either talking to the deceased people that they say they are talking to, and bringing messages through to you, the sitter, or the other way of explaining it that a lot of people theorize about is that the mediums are using their own psychic abilities, their own telepathy and clairvoyance to access the information themselves through the mind of the sitter or other people that they have access to through telepathy, and that maybe they're actually not communicating with dead people. That's the other argument that people will provide, and which I do discuss in my book. And you can't really prove one or the other, but when you're sitting there and having a reading, it certainly feels like the people are present, the dead people, your deceased loved ones, and there are also personality traits that come through, and all kinds of subtle things like that are not just that are, you have to have the experience to really understand. Yeah.
I had a comment to that.
And yes, let me introduce Jonathan. He wanted in on this conversation because he's very much in touch with the subject. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was really eager. I don't like to call myself a medium, except that I've had the experiences for many years. And when I've had psychic experiences as opposed to mediumship, as opposed to clairvoyance or anything else, if I can explain this to you, because you've obviously done the research, so you've seen a wide variety of the way people have interpreted it, including your own analysis and research. When spirits have come through, I hate to use the word possession, but they do say sometimes you should always question where that spirit's from, what its source is, and so on. That's up to the observer or where a person is spiritually for themselves. If they're atheist or agnostic, how can they pose that question? They're taking it, with an analytical mind. But when a spirit comes through, especially deceased members, they come through in full living color, like full expression, details that have knowledge that I should have no knowledge of. Whereas when I've used psychic abilities, it's been more like, I always say it's like almost like radar, like you're pinging the information and kind of like going on what comes back stronger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, Jonathan, because one of the ways I researched this was I asked the mediums themselves, and like you're saying, they can tell the difference between when they are bringing through psychic information and when they are bringing through what we call mediumistic information, or information that is coming from the connection with this deceased person. And they say there's a very distinct difference, just like you described. Yeah. They're aware of this. And my point is, why not accept that? Why not accept that these mediums who have been doing this for decades have developed the capacity to make that discernment? And I don't see any reason to second guess them and say, oh, it's all psychic. You don't know what you're talking about. Which is what, some of the people will theorize, that maybe they're just deceiving themselves. But they're very clear that they're two different processes, just like you described.
Right, and if you wanted to go in the physical sense, I mean, I've even noticed physiologically, there is a change in perception or what part of the body is being accessed, where I felt it on myself energetically or even mentally. So I've come to, over the years, write my own notes so that I can map it out for other people, so that they can then, I guess, learn, when they say learn ESP, like, buy this book for a quarter in the back of the comic book section, something like that. And so, who's to say it's like breathing, You change your breathing technique, and you can elicit different states of reality, right? Rapid breathing, you can do Wu-Chi breathing, you can do anaerobic, aerobic. It's going to elicit all different states in the body. And so I think the psychic realm, or if you want to say psychic, it's all psychic. It's all different aspects of psychic, but again, how you access it through what I noticed again when I've met, I hate to say dead people because they're not dead, they're just not in the physical form.
I never know what word to use either for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people call them
agree.
discarnates.
Call them what?
Discarnates.
Discarnates, yeah. Like I was telling you, though, on break, the most fascinating experience, I've had two of them. Most fascinating experiences. One, a guy who had passed away as a friend of a friend, dear friend, and I didn't even know this man, even casually. I only knew of him through this friend. Mm-hmm. She told me she was going to his funeral that Thursday. That Tuesday, I was at work, and he comes down through the ceiling. I'm at the printer. I'll never forget this. And he swoops down into my face. I didn't even know what this guy looked like. And he says, I want you to go to this funeral and take care of my family, my sister. And he shows me an image. I tell my friend, and she says, that would be great. I didn't know who I was going to drive with. I'm not going to be, steady with my nerves. I said, okay. I go there. There he is in the casket, the guy I saw, and I'm freaking out now because this is like, I was only 22 at the time. Wow. What really amazed me, though, there's his sister, just like he showed me, and his mother and all that. Now, I sat in the back, and I was getting really strong hits off this family because obviously we made a connection. Mm-hmm. My friend says, are you all right? I said, yeah. I said, but his grandmother's standing, he's standing right next to his grandmother over there. I didn't know who his grandmother's was, but he goes, that's funny. That's where she's sitting. So she goes and tells her, and she says at that moment when they started laughing, the flowers jumped off the pedestal and at their feet. And she comes back and tells me this. And I said, I'm at a loss. I just know what I've seen. So when you have these experiences, I don't know how the other mediums explained it to you, but when there's no stimulus or input and there's no other way of knowing, it's hard to take it onto yourself and say it's a skill that you have, like an ego, saying, oh, I'm a great artist or I'm a great dancer. There really is no rhyme or reason or switch to turn it on or off. For some reason, they see an in with you. It's almost like Whoopi Goldberg. As soon as they figured out she could read, everybody was looking to jump in her body and take a chance.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I mean, what you're saying makes complete sense to me. I think it's the people who have not had the experiences themselves that are analytical and sort of looking at this from a theoretical perspective that will go with the hypothesis that maybe they're just, that these mediums are just using their own psychic. I mean, it's just purely theoretical. I think most of those people have not necessarily had these experiences themselves with mediums.
Well, see, and I've never been the kind of hang a sign and say I'm a medium. That's the difference. I've tried to be skeptical and analytical and see this so that I could, so it does include more people and not be so limiting and myopic. I find that any group that I've ever seen tends to do that. People get very pigeonholed into that group and then a certain set of rules, and you got to do it this way. And I'm not like that. I'm like, well, the world wasn't created that way, and there's too many people that are having. That's the other thing too. Too many people have had shared experiences or had experiences of either seeing their loved ones in passing, regardless of their religion, walk of life experience. There's too many commonalities in this, and I think we touched on this last time when we talked about spirituality. Because when you tell people you're a psychic, no matter what their walk of life is, a lot of times they'll come back and say, "What do you get on me? What do you pick up on?" So there is a fascination that's built into us with this life after death idea.
Absolutely. I agree.
I have a little question for you here. After my experience, and I agree with Jonathan saying there, I mean, my experiences are very similar, and but as I say, we all approach things energetically, so we were feeling. But my ability after I came back from I call it near life experience, actually, because it just opens a whole new reality up to you about life, is when I got people that always come to me and they'll hand me an envelope with something in it, and they'll say, tell me about this. And one time it was a check, and I said, well, it's going to bounce. My ability to also feel, basically, and I felt that that's the first words that came to my mind. But I described the person that gave it to him as well. So this is one ability that's kind of definitely come into being since that experience. I had it a little bit, but not to the extent I have it now. It's like if I want to know something, somebody's picked a magazine up, laid it down on the counter, and I walk over and pick up that magazine. I'll pick up their energies right off the top. Have you had that experience before with any of your people?
Wait. Do you wear a hat like the great Karnak?
No, it's tinfoil. You have to have a good sense of humor in this thing too. But there's a lot of people out there that I've ran into, now that I've gotten older. I'm 63 now. That they don't like to admit it, but that's what they do. They'll pick something up as somebody's and feel the energies and see what's going on.
Yeah, I'm empathic. And I had early on in my awakening, feeling these energies more as an adult experience. I went to work one day, and at that point, I kind of knew I was empathic, but I didn't know what I know now about the whole thing. And I've learned a lot since then with experiences also. I went to work one day, and I was like confused. And then I was really, really mad. And I knew this was not for me. And then I was incredibly sad. And I went through all these steps of mourning. So I go home and I'm trying to figure this out, because at the same time, I'm starting to see these three boys. I'm seeing these three teenage boys. And every time I see them, there's two walking towards me and one walking the other way down the road. So I go to work that day and I find out, or was the next day? It's been like 15 years ago. So I find out that there was an accident where there were three boys in this accident, and it was not far from where we lived. And so the next evening, I go home and I'm calling my friend. I'm like, you got to help me deal with all this energy, because Leslie, I was not only going through all those emotions, I was seeing these kids, and then once I found out what happened, these boys were talking to me. They were like, you got to get in touch with my mom. Please tell my mom I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. Tell her, these, even now, it's tearing me up now because I can still see these kids standing in front of me.
Right.
But I found out that two died and one lived. And that's why I was seeing two walking one way and one walking. But I did go out to that wreck, and half of their vehicle was wrapped around a tree on this side of the road. And 300 feet up the road, the other half of the vehicle was wrapped around another tree.
Oh my God.
It was bad.
Did you contact their mothers?
I never did. I didn't know. I didn't know who. I didn't know what to do.
Yeah, you don't know if the mothers take kindly to it or not. That's the problem. You never know how they're going to react.
Exactly. I mean, I have had things where I've gone up to people and tell them, and you don't always get a good reaction when you're trying to give somebody a heads up about something. So,
I mean, especially right away, I think if you were going to do something like that, you'd want to wait maybe, 6 months or something after it happens, and sort of give the family time to deal with it before offering
right.
like that. And then you could offer it to them, and they could either accept it or not. But I mean, that's up to you. It's up to you. But
that's how I put most of the stuff forth. I'm like, here it is. You all can take it or leave it. I'm just going to put it out there. So.
No, I have a question for Leslie though. I didn't catch the whole beginning of the show. Is your specialty or your focus on this book specifically on afterlife and mediumship? Or was it all aspects of psychic phenomena?
Sort of a broad range of evidence for survival path deaths that I've brought into one book. So I've gone to a lot of different research areas and just journalistically looked at what the most evidential material is, from a pretty intellectual standpoint, but it's very readable. But case histories of children that remember past lives and that have been verified, and memories between lives, and a lot of stuff on near-death experiences and after-death communications and apparitions and physical mediumship, a whole lot of different things, basically. And then I kind of draw them into one book, and I show how they all kind of interconnect and how they all point towards the same reality, basically. So by the time you get to the end of the book, you've kind of been walked through from the sort of easier things, the things that are easier to accept initially, and then I kind of gradually walk people through one area, and then that leads to another area, and then questions come up from that one, and then that leads you to the next one. And so by the time you get to the ones that might be the harder to accept, you've done the background that lets you get there and lets you be able to accept it. So I was very careful in how I put it all together so there would be a progression. But it comes from a lot of different areas of investigation.
I'm definitely going to check out your book, because I'm looking on Amazon right now, and you also did one on UFOs too. So
that was the one I spent a lot of time on before I did this one. Yeah, so I'm very interested in topics that sort of expand our sense of what lies behind the physical world.
Maybe I can give you some info for your third book.
Great. Yeah, great. But I mean, it's very journalistic. It's a good book to give to somebody who doesn't quite accept this stuff and just needs a little more proof. They need a little more solid evidence And they might want to accept it, but they just don't. And this is the kind of book that you can give to somebody who's skeptical. And it's because everything in it's very factual, it's documented, it's researched. And there are scientists and medical doctors and psychiatrists that have written chapters in the book. I've actually invited 10 other people to contribute chapters. And some of them are real experts in their field. And you read these things and you just can't walk away and say, well, it's impossible that we survive death. There's no way you could come to that conclusion. And so it's a very good book to give to friends or people who have doubts about it.
Can I add one thing about time? I don't know if you encountered this with researching, if any of the people that you researched. I know, like, when given readings, as opposed to, again, when a phenomena happens, like when you see a ghost or you see a spirit leave the body, or I even seen my son enter the body when my wife and him, I conceived him. Came right down through the ceiling into her navel. It was just like a little orange ember on a beam of light. It was amazing. First and only time I saw that. But those are phenomena that presented itself, whereas psychic phenomena, or let's say finding missing children or doing a reading for somebody, I find that time gets skewed and sometimes in the events that you're trying to pinpoint. And I've had people come back to me, this happens frequently, a year and a half later, but call me up out of the blue. Hi, Jonathan, this is so-and-so. Okay. Are you a bill collector? You know, it's like, I don't know who you are. And they're like, do you remember you gave me a reading a year and a half ago? I'm like, no, give me a little more to go on. And so they'll tell me, they said, everything you said came true. But it happened at the time. And I've had people that were in denial. I've had people tell me, I don't have an Uncle Frank. You name it.
Yeah.
But whatever let's say somebody, I guess, isn't focused towards phenomenological experiences. They may be a little slow on the uptake. They may be a little unaware, and it takes longer for it to saturate through to them. I don't know. But as a psychic, when they want to know these things, they ask you, am I going to find true love? It's so hard to pinpoint because there's too many events that are happening, and it's happening in a nonlinear fashion. You know what I'm saying? It's part of their experience. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that it would be nonlinear. And I know that sometimes in readings that I've had, like they'll say something's going to happen, and then, or something is happening. And then if I say, well, no, that doesn't really ring true, they'll say, well, then it'll be down the road. It'll happen later. They can't necessarily always pinpoint the moment in time when things are going to occur.
Things are often event-driven rather than time-driven. Like, yes, this event's going to happen, but this has to happen first. Or whenever this person gets to this stage in their life, then yes, this is going to happen. Because time is only like how we regulate our matrix illusion, I think. Because if you go to where you start living not by the clock, you get in, William, you know this, there's a whole flow. There's just a flow how things go. And I'm experiencing this because I've gone back to work this week, and my whole rhythm of everything is just off. But this a side note. But yeah, everything in the spiritual realm, even, like prophecies or anything. And even the readings that I hear, they say they remind us that things of the spiritual realm are event driven. Things of our higher purpose in nature on this life, on this planet now, are event driven. Yes, things are going to happen as above, so below, but you can't go by a clock or a calendar or a year, or even an age sometimes. So
I was going to say, I think there's another component to it, though. I think whenever we disconnect from this linear timeline that we're attached to, right? Like when you're doing something pleasurable, time goes fast. You're doing something with drudgery, like at work, it might take forever. But when we go into an experience, whether it's like a ayahuasca trip or even just going in a dream state or drumming or anything we do, maybe our spiritual body knows that we only have a limited time to be in that window, almost like the movie Avatar, right? When they were inhabiting those secondary bodies. And it takes advantage of that time and compresses it, or again, it's not attached to this linear scale that we're in this physical realm. And so the experience could seem like, wow, it was so vivid, it was so lucid, it felt like it was hours, and it was only people watching. You say, no, you're only under for like 30 minutes. If I could just say one last thing, the biggest disappointment, I've never taken the readings or anything personal because I never put it out for my own ego. I tried finding missing children once, and I went out one night and I was so clear, Spirit showed me on a map where they would be. I showed up, and unfortunately, I got there an hour before they did. They wound up at the same Dunkin' Donuts, the same thing, and I was so disappointed in myself. It was 1:30 in the morning, and finally I said, I'm going to just go home. I tried my best. I get a call from a friend on Facebook. They said they found him. I said, where? They said, the Dunkin' Donuts on Route. And I was like, wait a minute, I was there. So like, Spirit was showing me the right place, but had I stayed there longer, my egotistical mind was thinking, no, this is stupid. Like, I didn't believe in myself. I was like, this is stupid. Why am I waiting here? Had these 3 kids showed up.
You didn't know how long it would take, right?
That's just it. This was the first time I ever tried finding missing kids, and I just did it on a lark because it was a good friend of mine, and they were so scared. And I said, I can do this. Like, something in me said, you can do this. And I went to do it. But again, if I just sat there, if 3 kids, 12, 9, and 10 show up at 1:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, that was obviously them. Right. My trajectory was right. Everything was right, but my timing was off. And so after that, I never gave it another try.
I hope you will again give it another try. It sounds like you have a real ability there.
Perhaps, but again, like, the problem with phenomena is, it's like you don't always know what triggers it, and then if you do trigger it, then you're prone to more phenomena, and then there's a culpability to it, if that makes sense. I don't know if I necessarily want that attachment.
Yeah. Huh.
Very understandable.
Well, I also think when people have near-death experiences, I mean, you can speak to this, William. I bet that your sense of time is completely different when you're in that other realm.
Yeah.
You said you were
there
dead.
Is no time.
Yeah, and I bet you felt like if you had to reflect on it when you came back, I bet it felt like it was way longer than that.
Oh, well, much longer. It felt like I was there for hours upon hours, and it was only 5 to 10 minutes.
When you're in that other connected state, time is very different.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. But I've learned Indian time, as we call it, since then. And that's what we do things when it's necessary to do. I go by a totally different concept of time now because of what you're saying there. Your whole concept of this reality is blown when you're on the other side. You know that there's really no limitations if you get your energy right, your mind right, your soul, everything combined and in balance. You can. There's a massive amount of things you can do. We look at it, telepathy, everything is natural. We just have to attune ourselves.